Welcome back all you great people. The festive season has come and gone and we celebrated the beginning of a new decade. From BattleBob, we would like to wish all the best for 2020 and may the year bring joy to all. Back to business of the day. It has been just over 6 months since South Africa had its general election that happened on the 8th of May 2019. I made some predictions before the elections, so let us see what happened during the first 7 months of this current administration. Here is just a few things that happened and definitely not all, as so much more happened. As predicted, the African National Congress won the elections, but the amount of support that they lost was staggering. Even though they still maintain a majority, they need parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters to change the constitution of the country, as they lost their close to 2/3 majority in parliament. The gainers during these elections were the EFF and the Freedom Front Plus. Even the Democratic Alliance lost support, as we saw during the result coverage that we did. Even though the current government would not admit it, but there has been an increase in attacks on farms and many farmers have been killed or maimed. And these farm attacks do not just affect the white farmers, it affected all farmers and their workers, as they were seen to be easy targets for these well-organized and equipped attackers. Over and above the food security being in jeopardy due to the farmers being attacked, but a prolonged drought also contribute to the food insecurity. Besides the farm attacks and droughts, the African National Congress proved over and again their inability to manage the country and even the local municipalities. Many of the local governing bodies were placed under administration where the local politicians are taken out of the management of the local municipality. Due to these incapable appointees being placed in charge of the local governing bodies, the service levels to the local residents have gone down drastically in many of these towns and cities. In some cases, the sewage has been running down the streets for years on end with no resolve to the problem. Due to the lack of forward planning by the individuals in charge, zero maintenance has been done as long as it seemed that the equipment worked. With the breakdowns now happening in rapid succession, the people in charge have no solutions to the breakdowns. Even the vast amounts of people on the payroll that take up the majority of the taxes collected could resolve the arising problems. So services have been falling apart one after another with very little resolve to the problems. But even after all the evidence presented in the state capture inquiry, that has been going on for more than a year, only some of the civilians have been charged with various charges, but no politicians implicated in these hearings have been charged with any form of crime. But according to many witnesses, the looting and theft in the municipalities and even the state-owned enterprise keep happening at an alarming rate. One positive that now President Ramaphosa has done was to appoint a new head of the National Prosecuting Authority. A seemingly impartial, internationally acclaimed prosecutor, and it seems that she has the relevant ability to prosecute all these politicians for their misdeeds over the past few decades. But it is not just the failure of politicians that has come under the spotlight again, the failure of the appointees to manage the state-owned enterprises has been felt by the citizens, with regular blackouts as the national power utility is on the brink of collapse due to affirmative action and broad-based black economic empowerment policies that are being implemented at Eskom. Through the State Capture Commission testimonials, it has become clear that these connected individuals made deals to enrich themselves to the point that the power utility cannot afford to keep the lights on, even with all the tax funding being poured into the utility. The failures at the new flagship power stations came as no surprise to the citizens. And many of these failures can be attributed to BBBEE policies that the government forced onto all government-run and contributing entities, where essential contracts must go to black-managed or owned entities no matter their capabilities. Since the elections, many of the state-owned enterprises got rid of many of their qualified white workers to make space for the underqualified black workers. Even at South African Airways there are major problems, as in recent weeks the airways has been placed under administration as this state-owned enterprise is also a black hole for tax funding. Even after being subpoenaed to appear in court, the ANC deployee CEO failed to appear at hearings to declare her a delinquent CEO. But this is the way of the African National Congress. The laws apply to one part of the country while the politicians and their cadres fall under a total different set of rules that are constantly being changed to fit their own narrative and help to keep them from prosecution. Coming to prosecution, former President Zuma is set to appear in court over the more than 700 charges relating to the now infamous arms deal from the late 90s that he has been ducking and diving for more than 20 years. In the last couple of months he has lost his last bid to have these charges removed from the court roll, as he was responsible for the delays and not the prosecutors. So hopefully we will see this former presumed extreme corrupt president appear in court to face the charges after 20 years. But during the last part of last year we have seen an escalation of violence against foreigners, where some were killed and many of their stores looted and some even burned down to the ground. Some of these foreigners pleaded with the United Nations to remove them from South Africa, but these pleas seem to have fallen on deaf ears, as the United Nations did absolutely nothing to help these refugees. But over the last part of the year we have seen a major escalation in violence against the citizens of South Africa and other foreigners. Many trucks with their cargo were burned because some people were unhappy about something. We do not know the motivation behind these attacks, and as the motives are not always clear, it is contributed to unhappy citizens that wanted to make some point or another. But it is clear by the failure of the South African police service and their complicity in fraud and corruption, that they are not very capable of maintaining the laws of the country. There has been a marked increase in reports of police arresting mainly white males for suspicion of an alleged crime, placed in holding cells where they are raped by black inmates, just to be released the following morning with no dockets ever being opened for the alleged crime. But the law enforcement agencies are also using violence against the very citizens that they are supposed to protect. We have seen many cases where extreme intimidation is applied to drivers and even cyclists. Many of the citizens do not even want to report crimes anymore, as they do not trust the police services anymore. The South African military is no better off than the police services. They used to be one of the top forces in the world, but these days the South African military is the laughingstock of the world, as they cannot fulfill their domestic duties. The units that serve on peace missions throughout Africa are also useless, as many complaints about rape and violence are being logged against them. When even African countries do not want them around, you know that this so-called force has become a gang of deployees from the ruling party. With the failure of maintenance of crucial equipment, the South African Defence Force is also falling apart at the seams. But surprising, the economy is still in the positive. Despite the politicians' rhetoric and pillaging, the economy is still growing at a snail's pace. While other deplorable countries in Africa show a growth rate of more than 2% on an annual basis, it would be a miracle if South Africa show a growth rate of more than 1% on an annual basis. Hovering just above junk status from the opinion maker rating agencies, South Africa is on the brink of collapse. The birth rate is far higher than the economical growth rate, and there is no catching up on economic growth, at least not under the current government. One thing that is curbing the economic growth of South Africa is the constant power outages due to load shedding from Eskom. But another factor is the severe drought being experienced over sub-Saharan Africa. Many of the towns have issues with providing clean water to the ratepayers and those that expect to get everything for free. We have seen in recent times that local governments are unable to resolve their water shortage issues and depend on welfare organizations to come in from the outside to resolve their problems. But this is also unsustainable, as donor funding can only go so far in resolving issues that are directly caused by nature and the lack of future planning by the local government structures. The collapse of the water infrastructure is imminent due to lack of preventative maintenance, as most municipalities believe only in reactionary maintenance. But due to the outages of power, a lot of the machinery that are supposed to provide the citizens with water are either failing due to power spikes when the power comes back on, or are stolen for their copper value. But for some of the minorities in the country there is another main concern, the fact that the government is selling out the country to Communist China. As many of the African countries have fallen into the Chinese money trap, South Africa is following suit. Just like in many other African countries, the Chinese influence is growing, and when the governments cannot pay their outstanding loans, the Chinese government simply take over the industries that they funded and place their own workers there with no opposition from the governments and increase the unemployment rates of the locals. So it would seem that the Chinese government is playing a long game to colonize Africa and even South America. But due to greed from the local politicians, they do not see the slow colonizations of their countries, as long as they can live in luxury. 2020 will be a defining year for South Africa as the citizens await a couple of events to take place. Firstly, they await the prosecution of those implicated in the corruption and looting of the state coffers for their own benefit. Should these prosecutions not happen, the international rating of the country will fall below junk status, and this will mean the total collapse of the South African economy. Inflation would mirror that of Zimbabwe and the unemployment rate would soar as international companies withdraw from the country. When the inflation gets out of hand, most that have the means will leave the country in droves, leaving behind those that do not have the capability to restore the economy. A hungry nation can become a violent nation, and as the police and military forces are already compromised, they would not be able to stop the violence that would erupt. South Africa will become just another failed African country that will beg for the international community to feed them, as they have destroyed their own ability to provide for themselves. Like many other African countries, the leaders would beg the former colonial masters to feed their ever-growing populations and provide welfare to the people. As violence escalate, factionalism and tribalism would become part of everyday life for the citizens. Where the politicians live in luxury, the citizens will live in their own waste and squalor. But there is a possibility that the downfall of South Africa can be prevented. A couple of suggestions would be to get rid of all the race-based legislation and allow all that are currently in the country to contribute on an equal basis. Get rid of this expropriation without compensation nonsense, as this will not do the country any good over the long run, as proven in countries like Zimbabwe, where they thought that it would bring unity to some of the country. Prosecute those that have been implicated in corruption and allow them to plead their cases in a court of law, not at just another commission without teeth. Make efforts to get those that left the country back to help rebuild and ensure that justice is for all, not just some. Prosecution rates for crimes like rape and murder should increase by creating an effective police force that are actually capable to provide the protection to the nation and are employed based on their ability to contribute and commitment to serving the nation, and not based on their skin color or affiliation to a certain political party. Get rid of the dead weight that bring down state-owned enterprises and employ people with the education to resolve and plan for future problems. South Africa is a beautiful country and has the potential to be great. Unfortunately, those in charge of the country promote division based on race, even though they want to show the world a united nation. If all citizens are afforded the same prospects based on their ability and not their skin color, the country have the potential to become a first world country once again, but it will take the people to work as one nation and not as tribes or races that only look after themselves, no matter the consequence to the country and the other citizens that in the past helped to build this country. If the ruling politicians can stop blaming the past for all the failures of the current government and start to look and admit to their own failures, they might see the error in their ways and work towards building a nation that was envisioned by people like Nelson Mandela. United, the people of South Africa can flourish. Divided, a country will fall and many will lose their lives.